Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In today's episode, we're talking about a finance-focused newsletter that's generated over 1 million subscribers. Max Rofagha didn't have a background in media prior to launching Finimize. He also didn't have a background in finance for that matter. It was while conducting research on how to manage his own investments that he saw an opportunity for a daily newsletter aimed at helping millennials become more literate in finance. Flash forward 4 years, and Finimize now has over 1 million subscribers, a staff of financial analysts, and a worldwide community of young professionals who often meet up for in-person events. I recently interviewed Max about his early audience development strategy, how his subscribers organize their own in-person events, and why he decided to launch a subscription-funded mobile app. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk for a moment about this podcast you're listening to right now. If you're a longtime listener, you're probably aware that I've never once run an ad here. I also don't ask for donations. I monetize this podcast entirely through paid subscriptions. Becoming a subscriber gets you regular in-depth case study interviews with media executives and entrepreneurs, all delivered straight to your inbox. If you value the work I do here, show your appreciation by becoming a subscriber at simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or you can just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, now on to my interview with Max. Hey Max, thanks for joining us.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
So you're the founder of Finimize, that's how you pronounce it, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, which I would describe as kind of like a finance-focused newsletter and community. But your background prior to founding it wasn't in media, right?
That's correct. I have zero media experience and kind of fell into this world of media by coincidence, accidents, or destiny. I don't know, but ended up in here and have been building a modern media / community company. Exactly.
And were you working in like finance before?
No. So previously, I've always been in the startup world. I've in my entire career only ever had a job for 1 year, and other than that, have always been building companies. My previous company was completely unrelated to Finimize. It was an e-commerce business based out of Switzerland, and we built one of the largest e-commerce players in the country there. And when we sold the business to one of the largest media houses, I started Finimize with no finance and no media background.
And so what was the thinking leading up to it? Like, were you interested in finance as like a hobby, or how did you start thinking about like launching this media company from scratch?
So what happened was, so first of all, I never set out to build a media company. Or a community company for that matter either. It was all a very natural and personal experience. And if I may, I'll take a minute or so perhaps to describe what happened.
Sure.
So I was in my mid to late 20s at the time, and I did what everybody around me told me to do, which was start saving some money. And I took my salary, a chunk of it every month, and I put it onto a savings account. And I did this for multiple months. And one day I woke up and I looked at my savings account and I realized, fantastic news, I have built up savings. But the immediate follow-up question became, what do I do with those savings? And for me, the natural first step was I went to go see a financial advisor. The problem was at the moment I walked through the door, they had already laid out all the brochures onto the table. And I noticed one thing, which was that every brochure had their logo on it. And it became apparent very quickly that this was going to be a sales pitch rather than them genuinely wanting to help me. And I knew pretty quickly that wasn't the solution I was looking for. And so I went back home and I started to inform and educate myself as much as I could on finance and investing. And then in the evenings, I would meet up with friends who were finance professionals, and I would bombard them with all the questions that I had from my self-education throughout the day. And at the same time, I kept bumping into people who were in the same boat as I was. So they were lacking the finance knowledge, and they didn't have that community around them of people that I had who could help empower them to make the right financial decisions. And that was the genesis moment for Finimize. And I started to dive a bit deeper into this whole topic and area And I realized a couple of things, and this will answer the question around why we set out to build a media company. First of all, I realized I'm not the only one with this problem. So within this millennial age bracket, which I'm in, 86% save each month, but they keep more than half of their savings in cash. And if you dive into why that is the case, you realize that 75% of millennials who have money and savings and who want to be smart about it, 75% say that they lack the know-how to going about making an investment. And if you look at the remaining 25% who do end up making an investment, 90% of those say that they consult their friends and the media before they make an investment decision. And it's that insight that we've been building Finimize as a media and community business.
And so, what year did it launch, and what was its initial incarnation? Was it just like a blog? Was it immediately a newsletter? What was the original version?
So, I originally started it just as a side project, and then I founded the company in August of 2016, and it started originally. So I'm not a technical person, but I have some technical know-how, and I built my own WordPress page, and I linked up with a couple of people from my network who were finance experts, and they would produce the content, and then I would publish it on my WordPress site. And what would happen was that I realized very quickly there was crickets. Nobody went to my WordPress page. And so I started emailing people, hey, I have this financial news site, because what we were publishing every day was the two most important stories that of the day in the finance world. And I would email people saying, hey, here's this news site that I've been building, check it out. And I would find that people would open the email, but they wouldn't go to my website. And so, long story short, I figured, let's just put all of the content into the newsletter. That's what created the newsletter, and that's how we started. And to this day, the format is the same. It's the two most important finance stories of the day. We always answer three questions for you: what's going on here? What does it mean? And most importantly, why should you care? And we do this in less than 3 minutes a day and not using any jargon. And that has been in the DNA, and that has been from in the product from day one.
So someone opens up the newsletter, like let's say this morning, and there are two news items in the day. Usually, I think I was looking at it yesterday. One of them was that Amazon is thinking of buying the podcast company Wondery. And so you have those two ones, and you'll analyze it from kind of like a finance perspective of like what this means for this publicly traded company. And like you said, like there are three subheaders: what's going on, and that's kind of like in traditional journalism parlance we would call the lead, where you just very quickly summarize what the main news is. What does it mean? So how does it fit within the context? And then what is the why should I care?
So the why should I care is for us the most important part, because the way that we look at our content is we want to provide our audience with insights. We are not a breaking news outlet. We're not a summary outlet. We're an insights outlet. And so the insights that we try to provide manifest themselves in this why should I care section. So I'll give you an example of why I designed those questions when I started it, because I would read in a traditional financial news outlet, I would read about the Fed raising interest rates, or I would read about inflation going up or going down. And what would happen is that either I wouldn't understand it because it was too jargon heavy, but even if I would understand it, I was still left with the question, all right, understood. How does this matter in my personal life? And that's where this question of why should I care came about. And so what we always try to do is we try to do two things. One is we try to connect the dots for you so that you understand what is a larger trend that's happening here that might affect you. And then two, what might this mean for you personally, for your personal investments? And really drawing that out is where we know from our user base where we really create the value.
So the hypothetical reader of that who subscribed to Finimize, they are reading that item, and then possibly making factoring it into some kind of decision about whether they want to buy or sell Amazon stock.
So, I mean, part of our ethos is that we do not believe or that we do not want to encourage anybody to do day trading or stock picking. And I think if you read our content, that it's very obvious that that's not what our ethos is. But I think what would happen is that people will read a couple of stories around certain financial events, and that might definitely impact the way that they structure their investments. I think last time we did a survey, round about 2 out of 3 people have said that they have made, or that the information that Finimize gives them has influenced their investment decisions. And some people decide to do nothing, and that's also fine. The way that we look at it, and I think actually to use the words of our VP of content, we want to empower our users to make a decision with the knowledge, making an informed decision. And if that decision ends up being not to do anything, that's also fine. We have no incentive for you to do anything. We just want to make sure that you make the decision out of a position of knowledge and confidence rather than ignorance.
You mentioned that in those early days, your friends who worked in finance, they were writing some of the articles. Were they the ones writing the newsletter? Were you writing the newsletter? How were you kind of, from a content perspective, how were you servicing it?
So we had 2 roles, and I think they're a little bit unique compared to more traditional news outlets. So we have a writer and we have an editor. I think traditionally the editor is sort of the person in charge of the actual content. With us, the editor is essentially the representative of the user and makes sure that the copy and the content is in a form that is easy to understand, jargon-free, etc. And then we have the writer. And so here, it's probably worth highlighting, we typically hire analysts. We don't hire financial journalists. So from day one, the people who've been producing the content were all ex-finance people, ex-bankers. And so what happened in the very early days is I got a couple of friends through what I did a Facebook post back in the day, and I asked people who have a finance background whether they would be interested in writing for me. And I think ended up with a roster of 5 people, and I would pay them per article, and I was the editor. So they would submit their content to me, and then I would go through it, and we would schedule a time, and I would go through it over sort of a 2-hour time period, and I would make all the edits, and I would say, I don't understand this. Can you explain this a bit more? Can you draw out why this matters to me? This is jargon. Can you find a different way of expressing this? And then we'd go back and forth, and that's what then would create the final product. And so to this day, we have this role of analysts / writers and editors.
And you're not doing any kind of original reporting. You're not breaking news or anything like that. It's purely analysis.
Correct. So we don't do any breaking news, and we think there's some amazing outlets out there that we don't want to compete with because, frankly, we couldn't. And I don't think there's a need for another breaking news outlet there. I think like I said earlier, what we really set our emphasis on are the insights. And so I'll give you another example. So we had one of our analysts write a piece about battery storage and how that is perhaps a way more exciting investment trend and opportunity that's emerging than electric vehicles. And so that was very much, those kind of pieces are very much research pieces where our analysts do their own research, and they then build data-driven theses, and they share their views with it. So it's not investigative journalism in the sense of we try to uncover insider trading or something like that, but it's investigative in the sense that there's real research that's being done, and that's the research that then allows us to give these insights to our audience.
So a lot of my audience is familiar with daily business newsletters like Morning Brew and The Hustle. But Finimize, like it writes a much more special for a much more specialized audience, right? But like, is it people who work in finance? It seems like they might be too sophisticated for Finimize based on what I've seen. Is it people who are like in retail investing? What's kind of the specialized audience that you're going for?
So we describe our end consumer as a casual investor. So this is someone who uh, typically has a works in professional services. So might work at a tech company, might be a lawyer. Some work in finance, and they have some investments, and they spend round about 10 to 15 minutes, perhaps maximum per day, thinking about finance. They don't want to spend more about it because that's not their job. They're not day trading. It's a bit more like a hobby almost. Um, and we are the outlet that they turn to in order to stay on top of what's happening in the finance world. Perhaps to give you a bit more flavor, we're a very large American audience. We have then second largest probably is the UK, but overall very, very global, and tends to be sort of anywhere between sort of 20, 25, 28 to 40 is sort of our sweet spot. We also have students, obviously, and we also have retirees, but our sweet spot is there in the middle.
And I saw that you also publish guides. Talk about that. That seems like a play for evergreen content. It's not tied to the daily news cycle. Seems to be kind of optimized for search engines. What's your play there?
Yeah, so I have to admit we're not very good at, or we haven't really put a lot of effort into SEO stuff. All of our evergreen content currently, not all, the vast majority of our evergreen content sits in our mobile app, which has a paywall. So we have a premium subscription product. And if you buy a subscription, it unlocks our full content library, which has hundreds of guides. We have a couple on the website for to showcase some of the content, but
Oh,
the
okay.
vast majority sits behind our paywall. But we are building out our web app, so you will be able to access all of this on web, and that obviously then lends itself very well to SEO.
Okay. Well, we'll get to the mobile app in a little bit in the
Mhm.
communities as well. Can we talk a little bit like
Mhm.
how did you grow? So you have like over, I think I was talking to your head of audience, something like hundreds of thousands of subscribers at this point to at
Mhm.
least to the free product. How did you grow that audience at first? Like where did you start finding users?
Mhm. Yeah, so we have um, over 1 million subscribers, and we have for those users pretty much not spend any paid marketing. I think that's something that makes us very unique there. Um, we initially we grew it. There's sort of there were a couple of cycles or a couple of phases. So the very early ones, we actually got like the very first couple thousand users we got from a blog post, um, and someone had picked up on us, and that got us a couple thousand users. We got hunted onto Product Hunt that gave us another couple thousand users, and like those kind of things happened in the early days. Then we started introducing our referral program. That then really helped boost our growth even more. And then we had a lot of partnerships that we did. We would do a lot of barter deals with other newsletters, whether that's like a Quartz or Wired. We've done a whole range of barter deals with other newsletters, and that always really lends itself very nicely because they know that our audience is into newsletters because they subscribe to us, and we know that their audience is into newsletters because they subscribe to them, and we're non-competitive, and it lends itself really really nicely as a growth channel. So those were the key ways how we've grown our audience.
And I'm sure a lot of my audience is familiar with referral programs, but to just summarize, I'm assuming the way that you set yours up is that you created some kind of customized URL that you would give to your subscribers and give them some kind of incentive to get their friends and colleagues to sign up. Like if you get 5 signups, you get access to like a private community. If you get 10 signups, you get a T-shirt, stuff like that.
Exactly. And
Uh-huh.
I think we were the first one among all those newsletters to uh, incentivize it through having a weekly edition as well. And I think a couple of others have now since implemented a similar incentive. So early on, we said, hey, if you refer, I think it was 5 friends, then you get access to our weekly review. And that was sort of a very exclusive newsletter. And then we also had all the merchandise that you mentioned, 100%.
That's interesting. And so it started out as this newsletter, but now it has a mobile app, which you mentioned has a paywall. And also, I know it runs live events all over the world. Talk about like how it started to evolve. Like, how did you start launching these other features? When did that happen?
Yeah, so I think, for us, um, that coming back to your question, did I set out to build a media or community business? I think I started very much from this problem that I'd encountered and had to find a very clear mission for ourselves. So our mission from day one has been we want to empower our users to become their own financial advisors, and we want to give them the tools and the information that they need to do that. And so for us from day one, unlike perhaps a more typical newsletter media company, where the newsletter in and of itself is the aim, for us it was really just a stepping stone, and it was clear from day one that it's not going to just be a newsletter product. Um, and so for us, what happened was A, we were able to build up that audience, and then B, something very organic happened, which is these meetups that started happening. So again, what happened there was very, kind of we followed our users there, because one day we decided we wanted to meet some of our users, and we met them in a bar, and I think more than 50 people showed up, and very quickly the entire bar was filled with Finimize users,
Was
and
this in
that took
London?
us. Exactly. That was in a pub in London. Exactly. And that took us by surprise. We didn't expect that. And so we basically did more events in London, and those then grew very nicely. We started having like 200, 300, sometimes even 400 people show up. Um, and we would then post photos in the newsletter, we would post photos on social media, etc. And then people would reach out to us and say, hey, this looks really cool, can you do one in Los Angeles, or can you do one in Sydney? And we said we would love to do this because it'd be amazing to travel the world and host all these events, but we can't. But you know what? Actually, why don't you do this on our behalf? And that then gave life to the community in the form of the meetups. And so now we've hosted meetups all over the world. These are all hosted by our community hosts. It's all fully on a voluntary basis. We don't pay them. They don't get any incentive to doing it. They just fundamentally believe in our mission. And we last year, I believe, were able to connect. I think something like 10 to 15,000 people at our meetups. This year, we've connected already 30,000 people. And so that's something that really resonates and with our audience, that works really nicely in unison with the content, because we say we have the analysts who produce the content for you, but a lot of these really interesting nuggets and learnings you can get from other people who are similar to you in a similar location or interested in similar topics. And that exchange is what's a huge value driver for us as well.
So let's say a Finimize user in LA wants to organize a meetup. How do they find other Finimize users who
Mhm.
are in LA?
So what would happen? So the process would be, first of all, you would apply. Um, then, if you are admitted to being a host, then we would share our playbook with you, etc. And then the host would be the person organizing everything. So they would have to identify, okay, so if I'm in LA, here's a topic that I think the LA community will find really interesting. And so they will define the topic that they want to talk about. And then in 90% of the cases, we have guest speakers. So the idea is that the attendees can learn from experts and they can learn from other attendees. And so those are the two reasons why people come. And so they'll organize guest speakers. And so then what we will do is we will advertise that meetup happening in Los Angeles. And that's then what will drive people to attend the meetup.
You'll advertise it where?
In our newsletter.
So you'll just kind of like everybody who's on the newsletter, the million people will see some kind of plug like, do you live in LA? Go sign up for this meetup coming up.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. And what benefit do you get from that if they're running the entire thing?
So for us, it's a very good question. So for us, I think it does a couple of things. Number one is we build our entire brand around this financial community, and so for us, it was a very, very crucial point in brand building. Number one. Number two, I think there's a couple of ways how you can think about sort of the commercial value of a community. It can either be a thing that drives word of mouth growth, or it can be a thing that drives retention and NPS, or it can be an initiative that drives or allows you to generate user-generated content. And so for us, the two main objectives that we are getting out of it are user-generated content, because we record, especially now in the virtual world, we record these meetups and we then produce them, our audio producers, etc. And those are super popular. And we also use it for retention purposes. So we know that as soon as someone engages with our community, for example, and they've purchased a premium subscription from us, we know that their retention rate doubles. And so it's a huge retention driver for us. And so our overarching product thesis is people come for the content and they stay for the community. And so that's how those two things, from a commercial business point of view, are interplay for us.
How did you end up launching the mobile app? What does it cost, and what do people get on the app?
So we launched the mobile app in July of last year as a subscription product. And it costs, I believe in the US, it's $79.99. In the UK, it's £59.99.
A year?
For a year. Mm-hmm. And what you get with it is access to our full content library. You thereby get access to all of these guides that I was referencing earlier on. You get access to the daily brief as an audio format as well, highly produced in our studio in New York. And then you get access to the analyst insights. So that's what I was referring to earlier on. These are the analysts insights that we publish every single day that help you spot investing trends and opportunities. And then the final piece is you get access to premium chat groups. And for us, that's one of the things that we really see is driving a lot of value, and something that we definitely are going to explore deepening and integrating a bit further into our product. But essentially, you get access to chat groups where you can interact with other people. They're organized by geographies. And you have access there to the analysts who are in these chat groups, as well as other members. And then they ask each other if they have recommendations for platforms that they might be wanting to use, like brokerages, etc. Or they might discuss some of the stories or some of the content that we published. And a lot of these vibrant conversations happen in these chat groups.
How are you converting and driving people into the app? Like, is the newsletter the like main channel for converting people?
So we have two channels or two acquisition channels for the subscription, or which currently, like I said, is primarily in the app. One is, as you said, is the newsletter. Although one of the things that we're seeing there is that there's a huge demand for a web presence from our newsletter audience, because I think half of our newsletter audience consumes it on desktop. So that's something that we're now in the midst of building. And then the other acquisition channel that we are using is, for the first time in the history of the company, we're doing paid acquisition. And the paid acquisition is leading just to the subscription product, which works really nicely because once someone purchases a subscription, we immediately get that cash flow in, which allows us to scale the paid acquisition side. And so those are the two key acquisition channels for the subscription.
Paid acquisition as in like running like a Facebook ad saying, talking about the benefits of downloading this app and sign up for a free trial type of thing.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, because I noticed if you land on when you land on the website, at least on the desktop, like you can't even tell right away that this is a free newsletter you could sign up for. It's trying to get me into a free trial for an app.
Exactly. And so the way that we think about it is, if we can get someone to become a premium subscriber, that for us obviously is super valuable. And if we can't convince you that that's the right thing for you, then we have a free product, which is the newsletter, and that does two things for us. One is it allows us to monetize that free user through our advertising, and secondly, we in the newsletter also showcase some of the premium content, and thereby might get a second chance of convincing you that the subscription is something that might be of interest to you.
As in, like showing like the headline for a guide and maybe a small snippet of it, and then leading people to the app so that they can sign up so they can read the full thing or something like
Exactly,
that.
exactly like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How is the company currently staffed?
In terms of
How
numbers
many
or in terms
people?
of
How many
divisions?
people, and what kind of talent do you? What kind of skill sets do you hire for?
Yeah, so we are. We're mostly the vast majority is full-time employees. We have a few people who are part-time, but overall, we're close to the 30 people mark. So overall, I like to think we're pretty lean. We have an analyst team. So these are people who I mentioned before, previously worked at Goldman Sachs, Fidelity, etc. They are the ones who are producing the content. Then together with them, obviously, we have editors, like I mentioned before. So that's our content team. Then we have an audio team. All of the audio that we produce is not just someone reading it out, it's highly produced audio content. Then we have a community team. So these are the people who help empower our hosts to host these meetups all over the world. Then we have a business development team that does a couple of growth initiatives with partnerships, but mainly focuses on the commercial side of things. Two things. One is advertising, and then the most nascent revenue stream that they're working on is we have an API business as well. So investment platforms come to us and they want to integrate our content into their platforms, and they can do that through an API. And so that's something that they sell as well. Then we have an engineering team.
You license that?
Exactly, it's annual licensing.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have an engineering team and a design team, and then a growth team.
And then for the audio team, is that just to create audio versions of articles within the app for paid users, or are you producing any kind of free podcasts?
Currently all of the audio is premium. We have audio only content pieces. We also sometimes get experts onto some of our shows, but we currently don't have a free audio product. No.
And what about social media? I was looking at your social media accounts. It seems like they're mainly being used just to kind of point people to your webinars, to your website articles, stuff like that. Like you're not producing like original content for social media, right?
No, to be honest, it's one of those things where I think we've tried a lot of things in the early days, and I mean, I'd be curious to hear your take on this as well. I mean, I sometimes struggle to see the value of having a very large and engaged social media following, because just the conversion rates are very slim typically. Like it's nice for exposure. It's nice for getting your message out. But in terms of actual business value, we haven't really seen huge uplift there. So we kind of do it on the side, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense. Like it doesn't make sense to create original content for social media unless you already like unless something like Twitter or Facebook is actually paying you to create that content, like they did with like Bloomberg Quick Take or BuzzFeed's morning show. So that
Hmm.
definitely makes sense, especially when you're trying to lock as much of your own your audience either through newsletter subscribers or the app itself. So from a monetization standpoint, it sounds like there's three major components. There's the advertising, there's the paid community, and then there's the API. For the advertising, is it mainly just kind of like native ads, like kind of like almost like native sponsored content within the newsletter itself?
Yeah, that's exactly it. We also have sponsored content that we then advertise in a newsletter, but that sits on our website. But the majority, I would say, is what you just described.
And if you were looking at a pie chart, what would the kind of breakdown be between those different revenue drivers? Like, is it mainly an advertising focused site that is like trying to grow its paid subscriptions, or is your subscription product mature enough now to where it's a major part of your revenue?
So the subscription for us is definitely the fastest growing revenue stream. It's pretty much on par with our advertising business. And then the API is the smallest, but there you have larger ticket items. So we're very hopeful that that's going to take a larger chunk throughout the next year.
And like the API, that's something like maybe a Bloomberg terminal or an E Trade or any of these platforms where that makes it easy for people to trade or information platforms. That's what you're saying is like they're kind of like licensing your content.
Yeah, so we have a, I don't think like a Bloomberg, like we feed our content actually into the Bloomberg terminal. You can go into the Bloomberg terminal and read Finimize news. But what I mean with the API business is more um, investment platforms. All these like neo brokers that are coming to the market. We just signed one of the largest asset managers in Asia, but it's always for their direct to consumer proposition, where they then integrate our content into their direct to consumer proposition, either our text or our audio, and then their users can engage with that content. And the reason why they do this is because they want to have a reason or they want to give their users a reason to open their apps or platforms on a regular basis to drive up that engagement for to drive ultimately the business value that they're looking for.
So I don't follow finance very closely, but one trend that I have seen, written up in like Business Insider and other places is this rise in retail investing driven by apps like Robinhood. Obviously,
Mhm.
this is the kind of consumer that you seem to be trying to reach. How has that affected your growth over the last year compared to the previous 3 years?
So I think there's been these two drivers or these two triggers since we started it. One was the crypto hype in 2018. I think that really got a lot of people interested just generally in finance. And then the second one is this Robinhood surge that you described. Like I said, we're not catering to the day traders that you often read about. We are catering more to slightly more long-term investors, and for that, we definitely have seen a really nice spike in terms of the engagement of our content specifically within the premium subscription. That started in March approximately, and that obviously comes down to that buzz that's been created there.
What are your long-term ambitions for the company? Like, do you want to expand into other niches?
Um, I think our so the aim that we set for ourselves is we want to build the world's largest and most engaged finance community. Um, and so for us, that that space of finance is really where we want to play in, and we think we've only really scratched the surface. We never say never, but I don't think we would expand into other verticals. If anything, we would really want to own that space of catering financial information, perhaps even data, to the casual investor.
So what would that mean? Like, what could you do to expand on your finance offerings?
So I guess that could mean, well, first of all, I think our content offering is it is definitely on the smaller side still. If you think about sort of the grand scheme of things where we could be, so really expanding our content, um, having as sort of the finance lingo is having waterfront coverage. So what that means is, having content that's perhaps that's actually, if you think about it from a niche point of view, having these niches within the finance space. So having commodity content, M&A content, tech content, all these different finance verticals. That's definitely something that's of interest to us. Then going a bit more regional, going a bit more local. We're currently very focused on the Anglo-Saxon world. We see a lot of demand from Latin America, from India, from China. So starting to regionalize our content. And then I think ultimately, I think it's one of those questions. Should we be providing perhaps a bit more like some of those data providers? Should we also be providing our users who are coming to us for the know-how and for the information? Should we provide them with more quantitative data in the product as well? Although that definitely is not on the current roadmap, but that's an interesting opportunity for us. And then I think the final piece that we've been looking at, and again, I'm just sharing this here without having a commitment to it, but we've definitely been exploring also going bit more into the educational space, and having perhaps financial courses that you can take through Finimize in the classic Finimize, easy to understand, bite-sized format that help you learn how to perhaps build your portfolio or any financial topic. So those are, I think, some of the areas that we might expand into.
Yeah, courses seems like a no-brainer in terms of a vertical you can move into.
Yeah, it's super exciting because it's also from a business point of view. Obviously, it's one of those things that you produce once and then you can just sell over and over again. And all these course platforms out there, are really interesting businesses. And it's one of those spaces where there's a lot of really bad content out there, right? So there's a lot of these get rich quick schemes, where I saw an interesting Twitter tweet the other day where someone was like making fun of these courses because it's basically, hey, I'm a multimillionaire and I'm happy to share all of my secrets with you for $59.99 if you sign up today. And that's the kind of course content that's out there. So I think that is just ripe for disruption, and obviously we would hope to play in that space at some point.
Okay, Max. Well, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
So you can find me personally on Twitter. My handle is Whole Earth Web, or you can find Finimize across all of the social media platforms, finimize.com, as well as our apps in the App Store of Apple and Google.
Okay, well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast, so if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.